Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in, downloading, streaming, however it is that you're listening to this particular podcast. This is a very special event. This is the debut episode number 1 of Just the Worst Movie Review Podcast. Now, I don't mean to say that we are just the worst. Of course, it's very self-deprecating, and we are professional, and we like to try and do everything the right way. So don't think that when you're listening to it, this is an awful, horrible, horrendous podcast. We think that it's pretty good, and that's why we're glad that you tuned in to listen to it. So I'm your host, Billy Donnelly. You can find me online, of course, at thisisinfamous.com as well as joeblow.com. And the way this podcast is going to work typically is that week in and week out, we're going to kind of have a rotating crew of critics from around the world, probably mostly just the United States, maybe Canada, mostly because my international language skills are severely lacking. So we're going to bring in a rotating crew of critics, movie experts, people who are very good at opining about the film industry, and have them come in on a weekly basis and offer up their perspective. We'll discuss, we'll debate, we'll talk about the current big releases, the new releases on a weekly basis, and that is what will make up the show. So joining me on this very trailblazing episode, coming to us from the award circuit and Hollywood news, Joey Magidson. A pleasure to have you here on this momentous occasion.
I have been called a professional and an expert in the span of the first 2 minutes. Normally, I think it costs a lot more to have something stroked on the internet.
You're like, when can I come back already? This is great for my self-esteem.
I mean, if you're gonna, you set me up by calling me the worst for a second, then you took it back. You edged me. I'm very pleased.
You see how we totally undermine your expectations. We come out and we call ourselves just the worst, and then we go, oh, look, we have people who know what they're talking about. See, it's a total mindfuck right out of the gate, and I think that's the way all podcasts should be.
Dating as well.
Yeah. So what we have on tap for this evening, this afternoon, this morning, whenever it is that you're listening to us, is 2 big films. One that you might be a little bit more familiar with because it's got a lot of push behind it as far as promotional, and that is 20th Century Fox's The Martian. But first off, what we're going to be talking about is the drug thriller Sicario, which has been in limited release for a couple of weeks now. Finally, this week, it goes wide. So we're going to jump into that film first, and kind of lay out what the film is about, and then we'll get into our opinions of it, and we'll get into what we like, what we don't like, and whether or not we would ultimately recommend anyone go and see it. So this is, once again, a drug crime thriller directed by Denis Villeneuve, that stars Emily Blunt, Benicio del Toro, and Josh Brolin. Ultimately giving you a peek at the drug war, not necessarily on a local level, but on a much larger scale, as 3 different individuals join in a joint task force in order to track down a drug lord in the cartels of Mexico, in order to try and make some type of dent in the drug trafficking, drug smuggling trade that goes on between Mexico and the United States, mostly under the watch of the United States government, as well as the different authorities and law enforcement branches who are trying to slow things down and ultimately put an end to this. Emily Blunt plays a small-time agent on a local level with experience in tactics, who is called in to this task force to try and use her expertise to aid someone a little bit further along, a little higher on the food chain in Josh Brolin, as well as the mysterious Benicio del Toro, who has his own ways and means to try and get results, and also, once again, try to affect the drug war either positively or negatively. this was kind of a surprising film for me, Joey, because Sicario wasn't one that I had been tracking for quite some time from Lionsgate, and I think going in, I hadn't really known a lot about the film going in, and you know when we hear about drug kind of movies, a lot of them tend to be a little bit more action based, and people taking down drug dealers and whatnot. And even when you go down to dealing with the cartels or drug lords, much more fantastical as a way of how they're handled. This one is very gritty, much darker. And I think with Villeneuve involved here, as we kind of saw with Prisoners with his last film, really kind of gets into the worst of humanity and how we deal with our problems and how we try to affect change. And those are some of the things that really stuck out to me as I was watching the film.
He's mainly the reason that I was intrigued going in. He's a huge fan of Prisoners. He's actually one of the few filmmakers that I actually think is better when he works in the studio system. I would argue that Prisoners and Sicario are better than Enemy and Incendies.
Mm-hmm.
But, your mileage may vary. The thing is, yeah, you're right. This is not, I guess this Traffic may be the gold standard when it comes to the cartel movie these days. This is much closer to Chinatown and Munich. Not in terms of quality necessarily, but in terms of moral ambiguity and slowly having secrets revealed, not learning everything about things, and getting the sense that no matter what character you are in the story, from audience to the protagonist, you're a small cog in a wheel that you're never going to fully understand.
Yeah, I mean, it is... it is probably the most beautiful, ugly movie I may have ever seen. You have Roger Deakins on cinematography, so right out of the gate you have these incredible shots, these beautiful landscapes, these long tracking shots, especially these aerial shots that they tend to kind of introduce in between setups, and as they're being lined up, you always get this sense of dread that like just bad shit is getting ready to go down as far as the next setup is concerned. And what you wind up having is like these characters with immense shades of gray. There aren't very many characters who are just black or white. Not anybody who's good or totally bad. Even the ones that we think are good have their shades of gray and make you kind of question, once again, as you kind of bring up the moral ambiguity and the ethics of how they operate. This is a film that once again takes the drug war and it makes it dirty. It's not glamorized. This isn't like Scarface where you're like, oh well, the drug war, it's cool. Cartels are cool. Like drug kingpins are awesome. Like look at all the cool stuff they do. No, this takes you down to like Mexico, into like Juarez, where like bodies are being brutalized and hung from bridges in order to scare the locals, and you have
and people mark on it.
Yeah.
In this very casual, I believe that's Jeffrey Donovan's character.
Yeah, and so you see this ugliness to it, and you have Emily Blunt essentially plays this. She essentially serves the role of the audience in many ways, in that you're going into this, wide-eyed and idealistic, like, oh, well, if we just do this to take care of the cartels, then everything will be fine, and the drug war will be over, and we won't have to worry about these problems. Except she learns that, like, in order to really try to change anything in the drug war, to do anything in the drug war, you really got to get your hands really, really filthy dirty, which a lot of people don't have the stomach for.
Yeah, it's not to put too fine a bow on things, but the Deakins cinematography, especially, he plays around with night vision and thermal imaging a lot, and instead of doing, not to criticize Zero Dark 30, but Zero Dark 30 utilized that to clarify things.
Mm-hmm.
You saw exactly what was happening because you had this technology. You were at an advantage, just like SEAL Team 6 was.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, you're essentially blind still. You have no idea what's going on, which is probably the more accurate way of doing it. And it's a kind of a good metaphor for the movie. Emily Blunt's character, Kate, is our introduction, and we meet her as she's going on something very simple, like drug bust, hostage situation, that they make clear she's done before. She's in her element. This is what she does. There's a small change to it, and she's thrown for a bit of a loop. And everything that happens after that is one loop after another, and she's not the world's best decision maker. She consistently makes questionable to poor choices. Sometimes for good, sometimes just lack of experience. And she sort of is just pulling on this rope in the darkness, and that leads her to Josh Brolin, whose character, Matt, is... They never make explicit who he works for. He definitely works for the United States government. But as it goes on, you see that his affiliation might be perhaps different than he's suggested. And he leads you to Alejandro, which is Benicio del Toro, who's even more of a shadier character. And you never quite know what's going to happen. And like you said, no one's completely good, no one's completely bad. Even secondary characters, like I mentioned, Jeffrey Donovan, who's just their sort of agent in Mexico. And his response to seeing, like you mentioned, the bodies being hung, is just this morbid, like, they probably deserved it. To the
yeah,
agents everywhere. No one is clean, I guess, as it were. Even what initially seems like the most innocent character, which is a character in Mexico who initially doesn't tie in. Who's just, you see a lot of him with his kid.
Yes.
And then by the time you realize how he's involved, you realize, yeah, everyone is involved in some way, in a way that you don't want to be involved, is the best way of putting it. And as they meet each other, nothing goes well for anyone in this movie.
Yeah, in that way, it's very much. It's grounded in reality. It's a heightened reality, but it is grounded in that way because there is no, everything's going to work out kind of feel to this film. You never get a sense that, like, oh well, we're definitely on a way to some kind of happy ending. Like, oh well, they'll just take down the drug kingpin and everyone will live happily ever after, and we'll move on. They may move on to the next one. Somebody's got to fill the drug vacuum, but at least it's one more bad guy vanquished, and we can at least sleep well at night. I think the opposite winds up happening with Sicario, which is that when you watch this, you're more likely to sleep with one eye open because this kind of uncovers a lot of things that the general public isn't aware of within the drug war. You can hear about the cartels and whatnot, and hear about the problems on the border and how much that gets politicized. But until you start to see like how this affects families, how this affects communities, and how people need to respond to that in order to once again try to make any sort of dent, that's where I think the impact of the film really starts to take hold. Because once again, it's not so much as like, well, if we just win this battle, then everything will be okay. No, you got to get your hands dirty. Like this is war. Like if we're talking about the drug war, like it's actually warfare on a number of levels where you have people, when you start looking into, situations in Iraq or Afghanistan or Guantanamo Bay, like all those things that were associated with actual wartime in recent history, you uncover some really dirty, ugly things that people were willing to do in order to try and claim some type of victory. And a lot of that is on display in Sicario when you start to see, how willingly people in official positions are willing to bend the rules and try to skirt around, rules of engagement and things that we hold true as sort of American ideals that like, oh no, we're Americans. We would never do these kinds of things until they need to be done. And we go, if we want to claim victory, like, we can't play by the rules all the time.
Oh, yeah, and the script repeatedly goes back to that. There's, off the top of my head, 3 separate instances. There's Emily Blunt's first conversation with Benicio del Toro when she asks sort of the question she's been asking Josh Brolin for a little bit, you know, what exactly am I doing? She's been recruited sort of vaguely to help what she's been doing on a broader scale. And Del Toro's response is, you ask how a watch is made. For now, just keep your eye on the time. He's sort of setting up the fact you're not going to understand. And then he, like, in the very next scene almost, says, nothing will make sense to your American ears, but by the end, you'll understand. And, well, you can argue whether or not she fully understands. He then has one last line where he says that it's the land of the wolves and you're not a wolf. And it's sort of what he's saying about everyone. No one here is equipped to do this job. Not him, not Josh Brolin, not Emily Blunt, not even, it seems, many of the people on the other side of the drug trade. And it's really about, like you said, what can we do to make this tiny dent? And when you look at the end, no one's a hero, no one's a villain. I mean, you could argue the drug cartels are bad guys, but I'm sure that case could be made that that's their business. But if you just look at the three main characters, Emily Blunt's not your traditional, lead heroine. She makes very poor choices. Anytime, oftentimes she almost gets killed because of them. Josh Brolin is sort of, I wouldn't say it's a moral ambiguity that he has, because he definitely feels he's making a difference, but he takes this perspective of, I just need to be able to have sign a piece of paper at the end that says that I did something. It's basically he's essentially like the cop who really wants to just get the paperwork done. Like, I want to do this, and if we have to do it this way instead of that way, I can still sleep at night. And in terms of Del Toro's character, you do learn why he's doing what he's doing. But for most of the movie, he's the biggest enigma. You keep waiting for him to either become this superhero that you didn't expect, or the secret bad guy, and he turns out to be neither.
Yeah, I mean, there are no heroes in this film, and I think that's, it's rather unconventional in the way, because people, when they see films like this, are expecting someone to emerge as the hero. Well, this is the person who's going to save the day. This is the person who's going to do things by the book. This is the person that we can look up to by the time this thing is over. And when this thing is over, there are no people to look up to. There are people that and not necessarily that there are people you look down upon. There are people that you look more at, more kind of with just this look of disgust on your face, like this is incredibly shitty that this is the way things are, and the way that they need to act, whether it is employing torturous type of tactics, or once again, bending these rules in order to try and see results. Josh Brolin is that character who yes, he wants to get something done, and he's willing to do whatever needs to be done in order to have that sense of accomplishment, to feel like they've done something. So, once again, and to me, I think that was really stuck out about this movie and hit me the hardest, was how ugly this movie was willing to get when you're talking about the drug war, because we bring up Traffic before, and Traffic has some ugliness to it, but there are also aspects of it where they want to try and end certain threads and make it seem like, well, things are on the up and up, things might not be so bad, things have a chance to get better. When you walk into Sicario, you don't have that feeling at all. You have a sense of dread, like, if this is where we're at now, and things can always get worse, like, what can worse really possibly be if we're seeing this? Because this is awful. Like, this is some awful, horrible, terrible things that are going on along the border, as far as the drug trade and the cartels and the power that they have. And is there any way to really stop that wheel? Like, is there anything that could possibly ever be done to really stop that wheel? Because it seems like the more they continue to fight it, the more they continue to try and go against it, using whatever tactics needed in order to try and put an end to it. The bigger and the stronger and the faster it continues to move. So it's counterproductive to try and fight this drug war when the drug war doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. And going into real life, Like, we've been fighting the drug war for decades, and it doesn't seem like there's been any dent made as far as affecting change in it.
Yes, well, short of Donald Trump building his wall, which would be huge.
Oh, a fabulous, outstanding, tremendous, fantastic wall.
Now I really just want Donald Trump's review of Sicario. You know what?
They're bringing drugs. They're rapists.
And some of them, maybe the kid is good people. I want to see that. Getting sidetracked. But yeah, no, you're right. When I mentioned Chinatown and Munich, I think they're the apt comparison because those movies are to some degree about coming to terms with fighting a losing battle.
Yeah.
Or fighting to stalemate. And Brolin's character sort of explicitly says that X number of people are doing drugs in America. I can't convince them to stop doing drugs. If I could, my job would be a lot easier. All I can do is limit the damage that the bad guys in his mind can do. You know, so you have Emily Blunt begins the film very, very low level, but believes in her mission 100%. Her and her partner Reggie, they believe in it. They're crusaders. You have Josh Brolin who's sort of caught in the middle. You get the feeling he still believes to some degree in his job, but he's well aware that he is never going to be like, yep, oh, we did it. It's over. Time to go home. Let's go work on tax fraud now. He knows that he's going to retire and die, and this is going to keep going on. And then you have Benicio del Toro, who has not only accepted that, but decided to use that to his advantage in a way to... Well, I don't want to say exactly what he does, but if he basically has his own agenda that is not necessarily counterproductive or productive. He just realizes that working with these people will get me closer to a goal that I have.
Yeah.
And if it helps the Americans, if it helps the Colombians, if it helps whoever, I can't really lose sleep over that. As you learn more about his past, you learn that he has, and he was another one. You get the feeling Josh Brolin probably started out much like Emily Blunt. New, fresh in the government, going to make a difference. Benicio del Toro was a prosecutor. He was a lawyer. His job was to put them in jail. They all at one point or another were idealists, and by the end of the movie, no one is. You can say that maybe Reggie is the closest to remaining unscathed, but that's merely because he's sort of emasculated and rendered useless at every turn.
But even still, like he starts to get a little bit wiser as to what's going on, and they become battle hardened in that way. They do start out idealistic and hopeful, and once you start to see everything, you understand that there's no room for a mind like that in this. It's like if you go to do jury duty, and you're like, well, you know what? This is my civic duty. I'm going to sit on the jury, and it's going to be great. I'm going to do whatever I can to help the process along, and it'll be the judicial process along. It'll be fantastic. Then you actually get called on a jury, and you have to sit there, and you realize this is awful. This is terrible. I never want to be part of this again. That's what this is like.
I like the movie a lot. I would say if the year ended today, it might be like my number 10 of the year. It might crack my top 10. It's not flawless.
No.
We really are hovering on the good.
Yes.
There's no deal breakers. There's nothing, if you're particularly touchy, you might have a problem with it. There's a lot of surprise violence. I saw the movie twice. I saw it at a press screening, and then I got invited to the premiere, and I spent that time sort of watching the audience, knowing when the shocks were going to come.
Yeah.
And they do visibly upset some people. But there's one narrative misstep, and it's not a huge spoiler. But Emily Blunt's character makes one decision sort of to take charge of herself as a woman, and she is immediately punished for it. Like, within 2 minutes of doing something to differentiate herself as a female character, she is nearly murdered, essentially.
Yeah, see, I didn't necessarily have a problem with that because they do set it up they do line it up because at that point they are going. They're investigating, the cartels. They're trying to essentially chase the money. They're trying to chase the money. They're trying to essentially smoke out the right people in order to be led to the higher ups. The way that we're typically told, like this is how they try to get make a dent in the drug war. But you start out with the people on the street, you work your way up to the higher levels, and ultimately you're hoping that you're going to go higher and higher until you get somebody that actually matters.
Around was when I noticed that more. The first time around, I don't know why it didn't click as much, because it is set up. That's sort of when she gets like, oh, I'm in my element. Let me help with chasing the money.
Yes.
And Josh Brolin kind of advises, maybe don't get so involved. You really don't want them to know you're doing this. Like, please don't do this. But then he's also doing like Willy Wonka style, like, stop, no, come back, don't. And
well, because he knows, he at that point he knows better, and he's like, the only way to teach her a lesson and harden her up a little bit is to put her in harm's way, where she's going to understand, like, this is how these people operate, and you're going to have to taste that danger in order to kind of smarten up a little bit.
Without getting specific, essentially they find out who she is.
Yeah.
There's a step taken when she's in her personal life to sort of find out what she knows / potentially, silence her. And it's in a movie that I feel like is smarter than you expect, considering it's written by sort of a smaller time actor, screenwriting debut. It's so tight that I feel like that was. I'm not sure what it wasn't getting at anything deeper. So much of the movie is getting at something, and this felt like we need to put her in danger, and we need to have a struggle, this physical conflict, and it didn't work as well. It worked better the second time because, like you said, there's a visual cue during the scene that signals why, oh no, that you learn a little before her, like, oh no, this is going to go really badly. And if you don't pay attention, it does seem a little random. But at the same time, that and the very last scene is slightly tacked on. You don't need that extra scene to sort of sum up the movie. The movie's made its point already.
See, the like I said, the blunt, the little side blunt thing, I didn't mind because and it's taken care of with one simple line where he's just like, "Don't go in the bank." He's just like, "Don't go in the bank," and then she's like, "Screw you, I'm going in the bank," and you're like, "Oh."
She's so eager to do the job she knows how to do well.
Yeah, and as a result, she does pay a price for it. The one aspect that stood out to me that was a little bit off was as you mentioned, was kind of this random guy in Mexico with his family. Yeah, he's up late at night. He all he wants to do is eat his eggs with jalapenos in it and wake up and drink. And his kid wants him to take him to go play soccer all the time, and he's not all that interested. And for a little bit, you're like, is this like the Kingpin? Like, is he just kind of hidden away in this shitty low-key existence, and that's the way that he connects to this, because that's all they keep talking about is these higher ups. And as it continues to go, it just seems like a very random sequences that are plugged in throughout the film, that I think they ultimately do have a payoff. They take a while to get there, and along the way, as they're building, they just kind of lead to a little bit of confusion as you're watching it. You're like, I'm not really sure what this means or what this is getting at, because it's so different than the other characters you're following at that point in time. And then, I mean, when it does happen, when you do finally get the payoff, it is still very small. It leads to another step, but it seems like there was a lot invested in that for what we wound up getting out of it, and that was the one weak thread that I kind of found throughout the film, because it just, that part didn't really connect with me.
Yeah, I feel like it was potentially a bigger subplot. Like, there was 2 or 3 extra scenes that they trimmed, but at the same time, maybe the other option was, let's maybe have one scene, and because this character really, his job is to eventually interact with Benicio del Toro. And there is a lot, like you said, for it. It does have a payoff, besides, like, he is the bridge to it briefly becoming Benicio del Toro's movie. He has sort of a sequence where he becomes the protagonist. But it also has this other payoff that we're intentionally avoiding that does sort of sum up the movie in a way also, in the sense of this just happens.
Yeah.
And no one's good, no one's bad. Everyone else in the movie isn't concerned with the other characters in the movie. We're the only ones who see the whole picture to the degree you can see the whole picture. So when one character talks to the other person about their family, or one character talks about what they've lost, or one character talks about what they're after, the other characters don't tend to pay attention. Because they don't know. They've never met their family. They've never heard that story. They weren't privy to that scene. We are. So when certain people make certain choices, you associate differently. It is sort of a narrative shortcut to upset you in some way. You know, those are not the strongest links in the movie. They're the most shocking, and perhaps maybe the most memorable. But in terms of a movie that is by and large very intelligent and really sort of singular in its focus, it does allow itself to sort of ponder other things. It's sort of talking to itself a little bit, I guess is the way I would put it.
I'm okay. Sometimes we need to talk to ourselves every once in a while. Sometimes out loud.
Keep in mind, it's a very good movie.
Yes, no, an excellent movie. I like the idea of order versus chaos, and chaos ultimately having to win out in order to once again fight chaos or organize chaos in so many words. So once again, I think what happens, at least what we saw with Prisoners and we saw here with Sicario, is Villeneuve takes these films that, they're thinking films. They're films that make you think not only about the world that you're watching unfold in front of you, but also a little bit about yourself. They make you question yourself. What would I do in these situations? How would I react? Do I have the stomach to do what these people are willing to do in order to get results, or in order to get to a particular goal? And I don't think, I mean, not that there's not that many, but it takes a lot to do a film like that and do it well, while also just making it a good film. To have a good film with good performances and tell a good story. There's a lot of pieces in motion there in order to bring it all together and say this is a good film. And I think he's one of the few filmmakers who are around right now who are able to take all of those elements, put them together, and when you walk out, have you say like, man, I just saw something really good.
Yeah, I agree. And to answer your question of would I do that in that situation, I can speak as someone who for a number of hours, not even days, was a New York City police officer. The answer is no. I could not do those things. And that is why I'm a writer.
Yeah. See, and that once again brings in, kind of the law enforcement aspect, because you have people who are cops, and I'm sure that, when you start out as a cop, and I know people who are cops, you start in kind of with this idealistic attitude to an effect. I'm gonna help change the world. I'll help put away, the bad people, and I'll help protect the good people, and everything will be good. And then you see some shit, like so. Like when you're in it, like you start to see some shit and you see the worst of people, and you realize that either you have to toughen up in order to try and affect change here, or I need to get the hell out and go do something else.
I did the latter.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. You probably made the best choice for you.
I definitely know. For my sanity, yes.
Yeah. So Sicario, for me, I would highly recommend this film. I think it's a fantastic film. It did surprise me as far as how dark and dirty it was willing to get. But when you're dealing with something like the drug war, I think it's absolutely necessary. I don't think a lot of films are willing to take that on as far as getting into the realness of it and kind of getting graphic, showing you the horrors of it. I wouldn't say this is like the best. It's not like an anti-drug movie. If anything, it is an anti-war movie and saying like war is an awful thing. So if you're going to get engaged in it, be prepared for all the nastiness that's going to come with it.
Indeed.
So that would be Sicario. So that opens wide as of this weekend. So from Lionsgate, check your local listings or whatever that is that they say these days, as far as if you want to give that one a look. The other film that we're going to talk about is The Martian. Science fiction film from Ridley Scott that is based on Andy Weir's novel, best-selling novel. I believe started out as an ebook.
Sure.
And then exploded with people who were just absolutely blown away by what it was able to do. Yes, exploded. Pun clearly not intended there. That one just kind of happened. The Martian tells the story of the Ares 3 mission, which is out on Mars doing whatever it is NASA missions typically do out there. And when a storm rolls in on Mars, one of their crew, Mark Watney, who's played by Matt Damon, is separated from his crew, unable to be found, and his crew is forced to leave for their own safety, leaving behind what they presume to be their fallen crew member. Of course, what happens when you assume you make an ass out of you, and what we find out is that Mark Watney is alive and manages to survive the disaster, and then needs to figure out a way to survive in order to either wait for a supply run to be sent up to Mars in order to keep him alive, or for a rescue mission to come and take him off of Mars and have him safely return back to Earth. Cast stock full of all kinds of outstanding talent, from Jessica Chastain to Kristen Wiig to Jeff Daniels, Michael Pena, Kate Mara, Sean Bean, Sebastian Stan, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Donald Glover, Mackenzie Davis. The list goes on and on and on and on. And look, let's face it, this is a film going in that you hoped would be good, because the last few times that Ridley Scott has gotten behind a camera, particularly for one of science fiction, didn't really turn out well for anyone involved. Here with The Martian, though, this for me was a crowd pleaser. This was kind of your, I won't say your average run-of-the-mill everything goes wrong in space kind of movies, but it does very much follow a lot of that formula. But Scott visually is able to do so much to make you present on Mars, is able to suck you in so emotionally to the trials and tribulations of these characters and what they're going through, whether it's coming back from Earth still in space, whether it's trapped on Mars, or whether it's on Earth trying to figure out what it is that you're supposed to do in this circumstances. And I just found myself, here with Matt Damon, rooting for this guy who is just once again having to overcome obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, fighting to stay alive, just hoping for one more day and a fair shot at coming home.
This is actually one of my favorite movies of the year so far. I was a big fan of the book, and I'll say 75% hype, 25% nervous. I remember reading it about, I'd say 2 years ago, and sort of the movie was sort of forming in my head, and at the time I didn't realize they were making the movie, and then I saw it and realized, oh, Drew Goddard's making it. That's awesome. Cabin in the Woods is amazing. This is perfect. It'll be just the right scale. It won't be a big blockbuster. It'll be interesting. And then I heard, oh, Matt Damon. I'm like, okay, it's a little bigger than I thought, but sure. Oh, Goddard's leaving. Ridley Scott's taking over.
Oh, no.
Ridley Scott, whose last movie that was any good was Black Hawk Down. Give or take how you feel about one or two of the others, but the last time he was sort of universally praised was a decade ago, if not longer. Not necessarily your first crack at it, especially when last time he returned to sci-fi we all kind of fell under the spell of, oh, sci-fi will reinvigorate him. Just give him a chance. And he kind of rickrolled us with Prometheus. Which, in the moment, is a fairly satisfying movie. But as soon as it ends and you begin thinking about it, you're like, they were walking in circles and they're scientists? They're fucking morons. Oh, God. And then the problems begin from there. But I think he aced this. And I think a lot of it is the script was up to snuff. There wasn't, this is going to sound like weird praise, there wasn't a lot for him to screw up. What he had to do is he had to be able to handle scale, and say what you will, he has always been able to handle $100 million as good as anyone else.
Yeah.
Puts the money on the screen. You never hear about chaos, really, from anything going on with him. And he cast the film really well. And I would say 8 out of 10. You know, every time you'd hear a name, I'd be like, okay, that's right. Or that's who I saw in my head. Or, okay, that one's weird. But he gives them all these moments. And yeah, it's definitely Matt Damon's movie, as it should be. You know, about more than half the movie is spent with him and just him. But he gives these moments to smaller characters who, when a book becomes a movie, almost never, ever get that. You know, you barely would learn their name. But, you know, Mackenzie Davis's character and Donald Glover's character, they get to make the mark they would if this was a real-life situation. I think that's what I think the movie does so well. It's realistic in a way that you may not realize. Like, yeah, Gravity, or Apollo 13, they shoot to capture reality. But they do it in this very, not quite morbid, but very matter-of-fact, we're telling a dramatic story way. And that's not really life. Any horrible situation that you've had in your life, there's always an ill-timed joke involved. Someone tries to lighten the mood. Or you just sort of realize how ridiculous the situation is to yourself. And every character in this movie has that moment. Because they realize we're spending billions or trillions of dollars to correct a fuck-up and hopefully not kill a human being. And the insanity of that situation, you're gonna sort of wisecrack a little bit. And I think just the mixture works so well. I was actually impressed that it exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, those secondary characters aren't, they're not cookie cutter. They're not just like, well, let's introduce this trope, let's introduce this characteristic, let's introduce, this guy that you would assume would be there. While they do fit those roles in certain ways, the way that they are cast gives them so much personality that they do feel like real people. They don't just feel like, oh, this is the guy who's supposed to come in and with this idea at this moment in time, and as a result, like, everything will be fine. He does it in such, these characters are introduced in such a way where they do stand out. They are individuals. They are people that when they do come around and they do have to ultimately do something, when they are given their moments to impact what happens moving forward, you do recognize who they are, where they've been, and what their role is. I think maybe Sebastian Stan was the only one I felt was a little bit blander than some of the others. He's not given as much to do and given as much identity as everyone else. But
from something being cut out of the book.
Yeah, but when you have, like Michael Pena is somebody that's always going to stand out, and especially when he's given the room to, you see somebody like Michael Pena, and Michael Pena is the smart-ass, wise-talking, part of the crew. Like, he's that guy, but he does it so well that you don't even notice, like, oh, well, he's playing that guy that I typically remember being in these kind of movies. You're like, oh, well, that feels like a guy that would be in here. Everybody has that smart-ass guy as part of their group. Everybody knows that guy.
Exactly. And they find the way to tinker with it. Like, you clearly understand that would be Mark Watney's best friend on the crew.
Yeah.
And also, it's not really a spoiler, but they give Michael Pena's character the scene where he has to explain to his wife and kids that I'm going to risk my life. Not Matt Damon somehow sending a message home to his family. Not the commander, not Jessica Chastain's like commander. Like, all these movies, it's always the person who's in charge or the protagonist who has to sort of warn someone that I might die. And instead, it's the funny character. And it's handled in this very realistic way. It's not a big speech. It's not a big argument. It's just sort of, he'd do it for me. I have to do it for him.
Yeah.
And it's accepted. And it's handled in this way where I was very impressed by how they did that. They took most characters in the movie, just like the book, have one defining trait. You know, Mark's trait is that he's an optimist and a joker. So he looks at everything as a problem that can be solved. You know, the Kristen Wiig's character in the book, she curses. And they sort of translate into the movie, but they give it more depth. She's another side of the discussion. You know, they always give someone a moment. And the thing that they hurt, you know, Sebastian Stan, like you said, was probably hurt the most because as the movie reveals at the end, there's something to his character besides just being there and being a competent astronaut.
Yeah.
But they don't spend much more time with it. And I think it's a fine decision. It doesn't hurt the movie. It doesn't help the movie. But it definitely creates one of those, like, oh, how many guys were there? Okay, yeah, he's the other one who's there. He's not the one with the German accent.
Yeah.
I think I recognize that guy. You know,
yeah, he's like you're like, oh, he just feels like middle-aged white guy who's part of the crew.
Yeah, he also his thing is also the one of the changes that I it's almost exactly what I wanted. One of the changes I wasn't thrilled with, mostly just because I didn't expect it because I had these expectations, was, and it makes sense because who was in it, Jessica Chastain's character. It's sort of, she is the astronaut on the crew you spend the most time with, besides obviously with Mark, who's not with them.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, in the book, it's not made clear. Oh, it's Jessica Chastain. You know, so there has to be some delineation of who gets, you know, this speech, who gets to spend time doing this. And I feel like her character took a couple more scenes than other people would have had. But at the same time, it's Jessica Chastain. She's, you know, everything she does is pretty much great.
Yeah.
And she does make this a character. As much as Matt Damon does, I think in the future there will definitely be an astronaut who's an astronaut because of Jessica Chastain. There's this, you know, Apollo 13, you know, did a good job of like, this is how, you know, NASA works and we can overcome anything. But, you know, it's a period piece now. This movie, I think, you know, kids who are scientifically inclined are going to watch this and think it's the coolest thing ever. You know, and be engaged by the sciences. And it's very hard for $100 million blockbuster coming out in the thick of award season to really be a love letter to nerdiness. You know, it's okay to be a science geek. You might save the day one day.
Yeah, one of the, I mean, you bring that up as far as, you know, the size of this film. You know, there's not a lot of films that are made of this size and typically this quality anymore. You know, especially as you're moving into award season, you tend to have things that are much smaller budgeted, you know, and are telling smaller stories. This is a large scale story with a lot of pieces to it, and it doesn't dumb anything down whatsoever. You know, it's science and it's science. It's math and it's math. You're talking about jet propulsion. You're talking about boosters. You're talking about, you know, space and the velocity and the orbits and the, you know, the space shuttles and how the time frames and the cost. And all of it is done to lend it that authenticity of this is what it would really like. You know, it's sci-fi, but it's not too fictiony in the point that they're going to just try and dumb it down and simplify it so that everyone, you know, play to the cheap seats and make sure everyone understands. They understand here that by making it authentic, you can watch it and go, oh, well, this shit could really happen. And what if
it passes the smell test?
Yeah.
You know? It does. Like, one of the things I remember when Michael Crichton wrote Jurassic Park, I think he talked about a lot of, it just had to be on the level of, sure, it could happen. It doesn't have to be realistic. It didn't have to be, you know, probable. But this hypothesis I have, in some wild scheme, is there a 1 in a billion chance that the road could work? And scientists were like, yeah, probably.
It has to be science-y enough.
Exactly. And this movie is beyond that. But, like, yeah, a good science fiction movie, like, you know, I'm a huge Interstellar fan. And Interstellar made a big point of that also. Like, is if we ground everything in science and math, we can then do whatever we want. Because you can make the case that, oh, we just haven't discovered this part of, you know, astrophysics. We haven't discovered this yet. And The Martian doesn't go that far. The Martian keeps everything very much in what NASA is capable of doing.
Yeah.
You know, realistically, so many things have to go right. Mark Watney would be dead in 5 minutes. We know that. We can sort of accept that. But within the framework of the movie,
so what?
Every problem is science or math, and every problem is solved using science or math. And he explains it. Now it becomes a little bit of like, oh, he's going to work out this problem, so it's just the fun of figuring it out. But it is kept within the realm of, these are botanists and mathematicians and astrophysicists and people who are legitimately among the smartest people in their line of business, doing things beyond what they normally could do. Things that we, you can sort of, you can pretend that you remember your physics class and go, yeah, that sounds about right. I remember the idea of, like, the Earth swings this way, and I can only, if you go with the speed, you'll bounce right off, or, all the things that, like, a movie this does.
Yeah.
But there's something about the way they present it, where you definitely get the sense of, these people are smarter than me, but they're not talking down to me. They're solving the problem realistically for themselves, but they're giving me just enough that I understand the weight of it. It's like, I remember, if you remember in Apollo 13, when they make that, we have to make this fit this using only these parts.
Yes.
And you go, that sounds awesome but impossible. And then 2 scenes later, you see that they've done it, and you don't really know how they did it. This movie kind of fills in the blanks a little bit of, like, this is how you would do it. You have to take X, Y, and Z, and you have a shot at doing it. And yeah, it's done within the realm of Robinson Crusoe on Mars. But, like I said, again, it passes the smell test in a way that I think it isn't... It's definitely getting credit for it, but I think not everyone appreciates it in the same way. Like, this is a movie that you could show in school and get away with it.
Yeah, you probably could. And you bring up a good point, because you do have these scenes of Matt Damon essentially solving problems right in front of you by saying, well, this is the problem, and this is how I'm going to solve it. And now let me explain to you how I'm going to solve it by doing this, this, and this. And it takes you along for that ride, because now you can follow. You don't have to accept everything wholeheartedly that he's saying. You can watch him explain it and go, okay, that seems reasonable. That seems like it makes sense. And it doesn't matter what he's doing, but because the film does it with such confidence, it can bullshit its way through it if it wants to, but it does it in such a way that it's like, nope, this is the way that it's got to be done. You're like, I'm on board with that. Okay, let's go with it, and let's see how it goes. Let's see what the result is. And, going back to the casting, I think Matt Damon as Mark Watney is a fantastic choice, because, up until this past week where Matt Damon put his foot in his mouth a couple of times, actually the past couple of weeks, starting with Project Greenlight, Matt Damon's always been a pretty likable guy. I don't know anybody who looks at Matt Damon in these kinds of roles, or even when they just kind of see Matt Damon, doing what Matt Damon does, they don't ever look at him and be like, oh, Matt Damon is a dick. They just kind of look at him and yeah, Matt Damon seems like a pretty nice guy. Yeah. So when you see Matt Damon in The Martian as Mark Watney, who's essentially this nice guy, he's a nice guy. You're a guy you look at, you're like, I would probably get along with this guy. He's a good dude. I don't want to see bad things happen to him. And that's a key element of The Martian, is having a guy who you want to see succeed. Not a guy that you're like, I hope this fucking guy dies. Like you don't want that guy up there on Mars, where everybody's like everything he does when he succeeds, you're like, god damn it, I wish this one was the good time that got him.
Yeah,
here
movies where you can have a character you're not fully thrilled with. Even Matt Damon, one of his best roles, 2 of his best roles is Good Will Hunting and The Departed, where he plays kind of an asshole. Yeah,
he's got some edge to him there.
You can appreciate it because you see the other sides. Or in the case of Departed, you're not meant to like him. You're supposed to get the charisma, but also realize he's a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah.
If you don't do it right, you get something like Chappie, where I spent most of the movie wanting the human characters to die horrible, horrible deaths.
Exactly.
They're just atrocious human beings that I was actively annoyed that I had to listen to talk. Or to a lesser extent, some of the characters in We Are Your Friends a couple weeks ago. If you don't do it right, it's like for example, I like Entourage for what it is, but I will never claim anyone is wrong for thinking that it's the worst of humanity put on screen. Because it sort of is. It's white people problems, the movie.
Yeah.
So if you don't dig on that, that's cool. These characters are not for everyone, and probably not for anyone, let's be real. there's some fun wish fulfillment going on. But the success of The Martian is, and it's not something I expected. Like, I wouldn't have cast Matt Damon, just because I think movie star. But there's something about making the movie star also the likable guy that really puts you in this feeling of, I'm watching this classic adventure unfold, but it's also realistic. So I maybe he won't survive. Like, you it puts enough doubt in your mind that you're fully engaged in a way that maybe you wouldn't if it was either a bigger star who's not as likable or a smaller star who you just don't intrinsically care about as much. Like, you put Josh Radnor in the role, and maybe he fits better as a scientist, but I don't know that you're as ingrained in your DNA for his survival as you are with Matt Damon.
Mm-hmm.
Just like if you put Tom Cruise in the role, he's a huge star. But there's enough people who sort of don't see likable when they look at Tom Cruise anymore. They see someone trying to be likable, and that wouldn't fit in this movie. It fits in Edge of Tomorrow perfectly, but for this, you definitely need nice guy who, in this situation, has finished last, about as last as you can possibly get while still being alive.
Yeah,
and you really want to figure out a way for him to make it out all right.
Well, one of the other parts to me that I think the film does so well, and it's so easy for films to overlook this or screw this up, is just the simple idea of having the hero fail, having the hero taste success and then knocking him down again, and then building him back up and then knocking him down again. And then building him up, and each time you build him up higher, and then you knock him down further, so that it hits you. It hits you hard every single time. And you know what? And it's manipulative in a way, but that's what these films are meant to do. They're meant to bring out some type of emotion from you by what it does. And in doing that, it's having you react in the ways that you're supposed to. Like when it builds him up and then it knocks him down, you don't look at it and go, well, he deserved it. You look at it and you're like, oh shit. Like, is this guy gonna catch a break? Like they even take it to the point, like, he's growing crops. He's got to go out there and he's gonna grow crops. He's got to grow crops in a place where nothing grows. So he's building, he's making his crops, he's setting everything up, and now he's got to go and create water. All right. So right away, with the first thing you're like, oh well, he's gonna make water. Everything will be all right. Things look to be on and up and up.
Yeah, because it's because you know how to make water. You're like, oh, H2O, I know that one.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna make water, and he lays it all out for you, and everything's okay. And then he blows himself up, and he explains like, I didn't calculate the oxygen that I was actually breathing, the CO2 that I was emitting. And you're like, shit. Okay.
That's the exact same thing.
Yeah, back to the drawing board. and then it goes on again. And now then there's the part where, his crops face a demise of sorts. And once again you look at it and you're like, God, can't this guy catch a break? Well, like, this guy already got stranded on Mars by himself and he's fighting for survival. Like, why must everything be against him?
Yeah.
They even get to the point, like, Ridley Scott even gets to the point along the way where he runs out of ketchup.
Yeah.
He's eating potato. This is all he has to eat. He's rationing potatoes. And he's all right for a while. He's like, all right, I'll eat potatoes. He's dipping the potatoes in ketchup. He's getting by. You can't even give the guy ketchup. And he's like, I'm out of ketchup. I ran out of ketchup like 5 days ago. And you're like, son of a bitch. You can't even give the guy ketchup. What more is going to go wrong for him?
Because think about, like, in our own lives, when your phone dies. Don't
the end of the world.
Exactly, like, and not your phone. Like, let's be real. When your phone's battery dies, you're just inconvenienced by goddamn charger. I know exactly where it is, but it's not here right now. It's like when your phone dies, and you're like, I don't know why I'm bothering with being alive anymore. Nothing will be as good as it was 5 minutes ago. And imagine that for literally years, where slowly but surely you will always have less, not more. And you can't complain to anyone. You have to do work. Anything you do wrong will kill you. And you have to listen to disco.
Which is like a great touch too. It's just one of those extra add-ons to it where you're just like, God, how much misery are they going to put this guy through?
Yeah, and the way he addresses it by something I don't think people also were expecting. Ridley Scott, not found footage, but there's a lot of Matt Damon talking to the camera.
Yeah.
This is how found footage should be done, actually. I'm making a record, but I'm only doing it when I feel like it. Because that's the whole point of this. I'm creating a record of what I'm doing, but sometimes, fuck off. I want to go do what I want to do. And it does it really, really well. Now, yeah, it's a Hollywood movie. I think we're not saying what happens, but if you guessed it, you're probably right. But it's so confident and smart and fun that it feels like a movie we don't get anymore.
No, not at all. Not on this level, and not of this quality, not on this scale. We don't get movies of this magnitude done smartly anymore, done intelligently anymore. Because everyone always and look, a lot of it goes back to the book. A lot of it goes to Drew Goddard penning the script and and taking care of it. Making sure you have things in place. Right from the get-go, and not being like, well, we have a half-baked idea. Let's just go into production and we'll figure it out as we go.
That taken on its own, Josh Trank. No reason not to be excited about Fantastic Four.
Mm-hmm.
The writers, everything coming on board sounds good. But the thing is, if you're the money people, giving that much money to someone whose sort of skill set favors something smaller leads to problems. Like I in retrospect, if Drew Goddard directs this movie, maybe it's even better. In my heart, I want to believe, because I love Cabin in the Woods so much, that the best picture winner this year is Drew Goddard's version of The Martian. But my head tells me I have a feeling that 20th Century Fox would start battling with him.
Yeah, there'd be the micromanagement coming in.
There'd be just enough that the movie would be a little dumber. It would be a little sillier.
More simple.
More simple, yeah. It wouldn't have worked. So it is the combination of, you get Ridley Scott on board, who I got to imagine his final cut to some degree at this point in his career. You leave alone. There's not a lot of filmmakers, and considering he is in his, I want to say 70s.
Yeah, I believe so.
There are not a lot of filmmakers that you give your money to in a paper bag and you leave alone. It's Woody Allen because he has a low budget. It's Quentin Tarantino. It's Steven Spielberg. Ridley Scott. Maybe that's it. There's probably one or two more. But even the people that people go wild over, Paul Thomas Anderson, they all have something they're dealing with. Ridley Scott is on the level where he doesn't have to. But he made the choice to stick with not quite an indie movie script, but a weird offbeat script that I can imagine probably wasn't an easy sell to people. And the combination works. And you don't get that very often. You more likely get the young filmmaker makes the movie and struggles, and you get Fantastic Four. Or the older filmmaker doesn't come at it from that angle, and you get Prometheus.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a couple of things going for it, which is one, the success of the book, which allows some leeway, and then two, having Scott on board, because having those two key components to it allows Fox to proceed with less caution than they would other movies that they might be dishing out $100 million budgets for, where they're like, well, we want to make sure we get return on investment, and as a result, we want to make sure we got our hands in and we're closely monitoring this and we're making sure everything goes along the way we want. Ridley Scott's on board, so as a result, it's a little bit easier to pull in, Matt Damon and Jessica Chastain and Kristen Wiig and Jeff. this incredible cast. It's easier for them to be sold on the fact that not only are they making an adaptation of this solid book, but they're also doing it with Ridley Scott at the helm. You look at something like Gone Girl or The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. You're looking at Fincher getting incredible budgets as well, and probably being left alone to a certain degree. But being left alone to a certain degree to make those films because he's earned that position where the studio has confidence that they're going to be able to execute. Granted, there are times when it doesn't happen. You can't bat 1,000 all the time.
Ridley Scott doesn't.
Yeah, but they're willing to at least roll the dice and say we have pretty solid confidence in the fact that they're going to be able to pull this off. And even then you start looking at Simon Kinberg being attached as a producer, who I imagine also lent an incredible amount of muscle over Fox to be able to say, hey, let's just stand back and let this thing happen. And as a result, once again, we do get an incredible film. We get a film that takes you along for the ride. Even if you. This is one of those films that, once again, it's not about the destination, it's the journey. So, you can look at it and say, oh, I think I got a pretty good idea of how it ends. And, like you said, if you guessed it, you're probably right. But it's not about how does this end. It's about everything that happens in between and how it makes you feel so that when you do get to the destination, you're like, oh, man, that was one hell of a ride. Exactly. I'm glad I took it.
Yeah. And Ridley Scott, one of his things, for better or worse, is that he more or less films the script he gets. He's not someone who you feel like is tinkering forever.
Yeah.
At least not with the screenplay. Something like Kingdom of Heaven or some of his director's cuts, he'll, film everything and then struggle to figure out what to put in it. But, when he has a script like this, you get The Martian. When it goes wrong, you get The Counselor. When you're like, that script was terrible, and you filmed every bit of it. This was, you recognized you had a great script, and you went with it. And I am the first one to take him to task for his half dozen bad movies in a row, whatever it turned out to be. But he's earned another couple ones of goodwill with me, because this is above and beyond. Yeah,
it's one of those situations where when he's good, he's really good. When he's on, he's on. When he's not on, it's not pretty.
No, it is a giant waste of money.
And time.
Yes, you sit there going, that's 2.5 hours, $100 million of almost nothing.
I should have saw something else.
Exodus, gods and kings, and boredom.
Yeah, that's what we wind up getting. And, what we have here this week, one of those very rare occasions where you have not one, but two solid entries at the multiplex for you to go out and check out. Two good films.
Exactly, which isn't even counting indie movies.
Yeah.
It's getting to the time of the year where if you say there's nothing to see, you're not trying.
No, you're definitely not trying. And here, these are two widespread mainstream films for you. I mean, Sicario is probably a little less mainstream, but it is there. It is out there. Yeah, it's out there. It's out there for you if you want it.
It's along the lines of what Miramax did years ago.
Yeah,
it's $30-40 million. Exactly. It's right there. It's a challenging studio movie.
Yeah, which is what everybody always says they want. So here it is, served up to you on a drug-laced platter.
And if you don't see it, you only have yourself to blame when you get Ride Along 2 instead next time.
See, there you go. So Sicario, a plus from the both of us, as well as The Martian. So once again, Joey Magidson, thank you very much for joining us, man. You could find all his excellent work on the award circuit and Hollywood news. You can also follow him on Twitter at Joey Magidson. That's JoeyMagidson. For those of you who have trouble with your spelling there, I just laid it all out for you. You can also follow us here, once again, at Just the Worst Podcast. Just the Worst Movie Review Podcast, part of Just the Worst Podcast. So we'll have the website going up, I hope, over this weekend. So you'll be able to check it out there. You'll be able to pull all your iTunes and Stitcher feeds there at justtheworstpodcast.com. In the meantime, you can follow us on Twitter at JTW Podcast. Also on Facebook at facebook.com/justtheworstpodcast. I'm there as well. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/BillyTheKid, as well as on Twitter at InfamousKid. And we'll be back next week with another excellent critic and expert. See, I'm dropping bombs on everybody. Let everybody get all their credibility pushed there. We'll be back next week to talk about some new films on the Hollywood landscape. So, Joey, thank you very much, man. I appreciate you joining us this week.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right, so for Joey, I'm your host, Billy Donnelly. This has been Just the Worst Movie Podcast, episode number 1. We'll be back next week. Take it easy, enjoy these 2 good films, and we'll see you later. Peace. Just the Worst Movie Review Podcast, episode number 1, has been a presentation of Just the Worst Podcast Media.